Sairam everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we start, when you join, if you can put yourself on mute, we would really appreciate it. We will be joining right now. Om Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sadbada Om Saishwaraya Vidmahe Satyadevaya Dhimahi Tanna Sarva Prachodayat. Dear Swami, we bow down before you, our beloved protector. We bow down before your lotus feet. We prostrate to you with our awareness, senses, vitality, speech, and mind. Please be with us today. Om Shri Sai Ram. Welcome everyone. Currently, for reasons unfathomable to us, humanity is going through a challenging time. This pandemic has taken lives, young and old, divided nations, and the worst of all, it has tested our resilience. The silent sufferers in this are our children. Just like that, they went from in class learning to online learning, faced lockdowns, missed graduations, birthday parties, and even the simple pleasure of being with their friends, their grandparents, so on and so forth. This does affect everyone's mental health, and to be in a spiritual path, we need good health, both physical and mental. So, the NEC team is very grateful to our national medical team for putting together this webinar based on Swami's teachings and their valuable medical experience to address the challenges that our SSC students face today. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Nishi Dhawan, who will be leading today's webinar. Just a brief introduction of Sister Nishi for people who don't know her. She is a graduate of Dalhousie Medical School in Halifax and has been practicing medicine for the last 30 years. Her undergraduate degree in psychology, along with her interest in integrative medicine, helps her to bridge the connection between mental, physical, and spiritual health. She is also a certified Ayurvedic medicine wellness counselor from the Deepak Chopra Institute and the Kerala Ayurvedic Academy and has completed additional training in cognitive behavioral therapy for the treatment of mood disorders. She currently also teaches stress management workshops in her community. Sister Nishi is a long-time devotee of Swami. She was blessed to come into Swami's fold at the age of 8 and has been involved in the Sai organization for over 27 years as an SSC Guru, dynamic value parenting facilitator, devotional coordinator, and currently she serves Swami as National Medical Coordinator. Sister Nishi brings an excellent understanding and perspective to mental health as a physician, educator, parent, and Sai devotee. Having herself grown up in Canada since the age of 2 and raising children here, she understands the unique challenges and stresses facing many Sai students and their parents in today's world. So, the outcome is going to help every one of us. So, today's program, after my introduction, Sister Nishi will do the presentation, followed by some question and answers, and then we will close. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or you can put your hands up, and Brother Avi and Sister Nishi would answer them. Without further ado, Sister Nishi, please take away.
Sairam, dear brothers and sisters, parents and children, thank you to you for this wonderful opportunity to enter your homes. I want to thank Swami, my beloved Swami, for giving me this opportunity to serve him and serve his community so that we all may rise above whatever challenges we have in this difficult times. So please, Swami, do bless us with your presence today and help us, guide me and guide us all through the exercises that we will do today. Thank you, and Jai Sai Ram. Welcome everybody, and I'm very happy to be here with all the young adults and their parents today. It's a little different for me to present this on Zoom. This is the first time I'm doing this on Zoom, and not being able to see everybody's faces, but here we go. As the Sister Usha mentioned, I've been teaching SSE for many years and then let that go. And I was involved in dynamic parenting. So certainly this topic is very dear to my heart because the health of our children and our youth and families is really what creates a healthy society. So I am going to start, and you'll see mostly the screen and a little bit of my face. But I hope that this is useful for you, and we will have time for question and answers at the end. So just give me a moment here. Okay, so Sairam, Avi, can you just tell me, is my screen there?
Yes, it's good.
Yes, that's good.
So today we're here, you know, we are, our topic of today is navigating the pandemic roller coaster, but this is just one event that's happening in our life, and we have many stressors in our life that start over the whole of our lifetime. And unfortunately, we are in an unprecedented time right now with this pandemic. So what I want to share with you is, why are we here today? What is it about to do about the pandemic, or is it much something broader? And really what we're here for, we've been hearing so much about the pandemic. So we're not going to focus so much on that piece, but rather to understand what really happens in our own brain and our own mind when we're facing a stress like the pandemic. So what are we here for? The objectives today, we're going to understand a little bit about what's happening with that pandemic, to understand what it means to be mentally healthy. What does it look like? What does well-being and mentally healthy look like? What are the strategies that we can do to keep ourselves there? So preventive medicine, Swami talks about prevention all the time. It's so important. So we want to prevent illness. And so what are the strategies that might help us to keep mentally healthy? To recognize sometimes the symptoms that come about when we are not doing well, when we are not mentally healthy, and what can lead to mental illness. And then at the end, just to touch a bit on mental illness and understand, you know, a little bit about what's happening in our world today with the youth, and what can we reach out and do about it. This is a very big topic, and I must say, I was having some challenges in deciding what I'm going to put in the presentation today, because it's a very big topic. And you know, in the stress management course I teach, it's an 8-week course, and we go over quite a long time. So to put a lot of information in one presentation is very challenging. And when dealing with mental health and mental well-being, as well as mental illness, there's much that we can cover. So we do feel from the medical wing that this will probably be the first of a couple of series that we will present, depending on how you all feel that you want something more, so that we can go into a little deeper presentation and explore some techniques and strategies on a deeper basis. Okay, so where are we at? The pandemic roller coaster. What is happening? This has been something that our generation has really never experienced. Everything's changed, right? So that's why it's a roller coaster, because there's changing and it doesn't stay like that. It goes up and down and up and down. Your school has changed. Sometimes you're online learning, sometimes you're learning in the classroom, sometimes the schools are closed and sometimes they're open, having to deal with where to study. So your school environment has changed. Your home environment has changed. Parents may be working from home. You're studying at home, and there's siblings that are usually at different at school. Everybody's in one space together, and everybody's needing their space, and sometimes someone needs to be quiet. So there's a lot of changes in the home environment that have happened, and that can be very, very challenging, right? Because suddenly, when we're used to having our own routine, our own friends, our own ability to have our space, everything's down together, and we have to reframe and adjust to what's happening. Physical activities, that's changed, right? Sometimes we were able to go to the gym, and sometimes we were able to play sports. Now our sports have stopped. Sometimes the gym has stopped. Sometimes our exercise, our classes, whatever we do in and outside the home has changed. We tend to be not as much active, because when the pandemic, when lockdown's there, we can't do the things that we normally do outside or physically. We're on Zoom a lot. We're on the computer a lot. And even myself, I had to change my practice. So I'm sitting in front of a computer talking to patients all the time. And it's so difficult because I don't move out of my chair. So my body gets stiff. I don't feel so good. So there's so many changes that have happened. Our social activities. What about our how we meet with our friends and our our teachers, or even any other interactions, how we have family gatherings, how we have our social networks in our families and our community. Our size centers have closed, and so we're having virtual size centers, but that makes it a little different. It's another adjustment. We don't get to see our SSC students together and in the physical room. We don't get to be involved with our teachers on a one-to-one. So there's a lot of changes that have happened from there. We're not necessarily singing the same bhajans or doing the same things as we were. As much as the great effort that the SSC and the whole Psy community has done to bring everything virtually, there's obviously still an adjustment, still something that's changed, and we might miss some of that. So all of this is really, we've had to adapt in a very short time, adapt again and again and again, not just once, but again and again. And that's that roller coaster, right? We've had to adapt to these changes. And sometimes it's hard, because change is one of the biggest stressors in our life. And when we have to constantly keep changing, that becomes really challenging. We've also had to look at fears about COVID, about ourselves and our family. We don't want to give COVID to our parents or our elders in our family, and we have to be careful who we're outside with. Fears for the future of people who are graduating in high school this year. It's so much uncertainty, and are you going to be online learning or not online learning? What's going to happen with your graduation? What's going to happen in the future? So there's a lot of fears that happen as well. And then, of course, everybody's talking about the vaccines, and should I, what's going to happen with the vaccines, and if they're going to get the dose properly or not. And, some people have questions if they should take the vaccines. So all of this is going on in our head 24/7, day and day, and it takes its toll, and we're going to see how it takes its toll. A lot of us are saying, when will this end? So what we're going to try to do is give you some strategies. We can't change the pandemic. We can't stop the pandemic. But what we can do is perhaps start to look at how are we going to be able to manage some of the thoughts that come into our head and some of the stressors. Okay, so first of all, the first technique that we're going to do is just take a deep breath. Everybody, take a deep breath. We just heard about all the changes and all the things that are happening in our life, but recognize that when we take a deep breath, we certainly just relax the body, okay? And then the body relaxes and is able to think a little bit more clearly. We're not in this alone. And these are the messages that we have to be aware of. We're not in this alone. The whole world is experiencing this together. Everyone has experiencing the pandemic, but everybody has a unique experience. Your experience as one person, even in your own family, is different from the other person in your own family. And so you have to recognize that each person has his own, some people may be having less stress, some people may be having more stress, but everybody's experiencing this and we're all going through it together and we're all experiencing that COVID fatigue. So one first step in really going through this whole pandemic is to recognize that you're having these feelings, acknowledge them. They're normal to have these experiences of anxiety, uncertainty, frustration, because it's a major event that's happened. So when we acknowledge our feelings, we first have to be aware of them, take it, understand what's happening, then acknowledge our feelings, and then we can sort of say, okay, now what am I going to do with that? And one thing that we always know is that Sai is with us. Swami has always told us that he will always protect his devotees. And we have to take that as a reassurance, because then again, it makes us feel calm and relaxed. It's not, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's always hard to think that everything's going to be okay. But when we start to say that into our brain, you can physically feel your body relax. Okay, so that's the thing that we have to realize. We are all listening together, and these are normal emotions that are going to come up. We just need to now understand what to do with them. So Swami says, you must welcome tests as it gives you confidence and ensures promotion. So Swami, this is a big test. Swami's given the whole world a big test. He wants to see, what are we going to do? How are we going to react? How are we going to change our lives? What are we going to, what thought process are we going to go through? He talks about ensuring promotion. Why does he talk about ensuring promotion? It's because when we have tests and we go through them, we're able to get better and understand better and grow. We're able to grow and understand more about ourselves and the world around us. We can make changes for ourselves that are good changes for ourselves. We can help others make good changes. So when Swami gives us a challenge, we have to meet it. And that's why Swami doesn't say his tests are going to be easy, right? They never are. But when we recognize it's a test, it's a challenge. Then when Swami asks us to rise to our higher self and move forward. So what we're going to talk about when Swami gives us these tests, what are we going to do? We have to look at where we are mentally, how strong are we, and how do we have the resilience to manage these tests that are put, like the pandemic, or like your school situation, or like your family situation, or whatever's going in your life. All these tests that sometimes come in through our life, how are we going to manage them? And where are we at? So let's take a look first and say, what is mental health? What does it mean to be mentally healthy? And we look at the World Health Organization. World Health Organization says mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential and can cope with the normal stressors of life, can produce and can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So it doesn't mean that you have no stress or you never have any emotions. It means that we as an individual can cope with those stressors, can continue our work or school or anything that we're doing in our community, and that we also feel valuable in our community. We're able to make a contribution, whether it's our school, whether it's our family, whether it's the Sai Center, whether it's any other community. So whatever we're doing and whatever stage of life we're in, we're able to handle it and contribute in a healthy manner. And mental health refers to our cognitive, our thoughts, our behavioral, and our emotional well-being. It's all about how we think, feel, and behave. Okay, that is what mental health, that's the crux of mental health, is how we're thinking, how is it affecting how we're feeling, and how is it affecting how we're behaving. And when we start to make those connections and we keep those things healthy, our experience of the world is experienced in a healthy, positive manner, even if there's stressors and even if there's negativity. And we do know that mental health can affect our daily life, our relationships, and even our physical health. So when we know that there's a huge mind-body connection. When we're not physically healthy, mentally healthy, we are not necessarily physically healthy. And we know that when we're not mentally healthy, when we're stressed, when we're angry, it affects our relationships with our families, with our friends, with ourselves. And so it can affect us in many ways. So what are the hallmarks of people who have good mental health? They have an ability to enjoy life, even though the stressors of daily life are there. So it means that, for example, if you're going to do a Zoom online class, or you're going to have a meal with your family, or you're going to go out and go for a walk, that you're not constantly worried about what's going to be happening in the future or in the past. You're able to enjoy that moment. You're able to enjoy the meal with your family. You're able to enjoy your friendship with someone, even if it's on Zoom or not on Zoom or at school. It means that you're able to not have the overwhelming thoughts ruin your present moment and your daily life's activities. Resilience, the ability to bounce back and adapt quickly. So we've had a stress, had a terrible mark at school, or someone said something, and okay, are we able to deal with it, understand it, and bounce back? Or do we continue to feel bad again and again and again? So that's the difference. When someone's mentally healthy, strong, we still have those experiences, but we bounce back. Balance to understand, okay, I can't spend all my time studying or all my time doing physical exercise or all my time. I need to balance my mental health, my physical health, my eating, my exercise, my family time, my spiritual time, and recognizing that when we do that it keeps our brain and mental health happy. And then there's other things like self-actualization or self-discovery. And that's really important in mental health. People who are mentally healthy are asking themselves the question, who am I? What do I do? What are my talents? What are my strengths? What do I want to be? What are my values? Where do they show up in my life? They're evaluating and growing themselves. That process of growing and not staying stagnant, but evolving oneself to who you are and who do you want to be in this world. Flexibility, very important for mental health. Flexibility means you are able to change. If someone has a change of plans, you're able to say, okay, that's okay. I'd had all this stuff planned in my mind, but there's been a change of plans. We can be adaptable. We can be flexible and change and reframe. Sometimes we expect this and this and this to happen, but we can actually say, okay, no, that's not going to happen. So I can revisit. Maybe it's okay if this works this way. Okay, and then equanimity. So when we have a person who is actually mentally healthy, they often are very calm. They have calmed emotions. They might have something coming up for them, but they can stay calm. And they're not, and Swami talks about equanimity, right? All the time. Not too high in emotions, not too low in emotions, much more stable and controlled. So again, goes and repeats some of the same things, but again, adding a few more things, enjoying life, able to make adjustments, solving, and this is really important for young adults, solving their problems largely by their own efforts and decisions. And that's something as young adults, you're learning. Sometimes we need a lot of help when we're younger, but at each stage of our life, whatever challenge we have that's appropriate to our stage of life, if we're able to work and solving them on our own, that really helps us to be mentally strong because we get some more self-esteem. So and it's not a problem to ask for help, but when we're able to take the effort to find it on our own and make and brainstorm, oh, these are different opportunities, these are different things, because we get self-confidence. Swami talks a lot about self-confidence with his students, right? He says, I want you to be leaders, I want you to be strong, I want you to be confident. And we get self-confidence by using our own efforts, making our decisions, and getting the advice from teachers, elders, parents, siblings, or whoever are trusted people in our lives. But we have to have an ability and a experience of solving it on our own. Having a personal sense of security, having a belonging to a community or in a group, has a strong sense of human values. When someone has a lot of strong sense of human values, and Swami, of course, right? Swami gives us the 5 human values. When Swami talks about human values, he knows that if we know where our values are, that gives us the confidence of how we want to act in our life. And then it gives us a guidepost, right? Swami's given us 5 human values. He's giving us sealing on desires. He's giving us 10 paths to devotion. He's given us all these values and strengths that when we're confused, if we have those behind us, we know where we want to go, right? So having a strong sense of human values allows our mind to not be confused, allows us to stay on the path, and we know internally what we want. Can accept and give love, right? So Swami talks about love, giving love and accepting love. Sometimes we can give a lot of love. Sometimes it's hard to accept love, right? Sometimes when someone's, even if you've done something wrong or you feel terrible about yourself and someone's loving you, sometimes we don't feel open enough to accept love. And that's really important, to accept love as well as to give love. And then living in a world of reality rather than fantasy. Sometimes what happens is our mind goes too fast, and we're always doing this wishful thinking of what should be, this is what should be, but rather than saying, okay, what is in front of me right now? So these are the things that when people are mentally healthy, they focus on what's there and not living in a fantasy world. Okay, and developing emotional maturity, and we're going to talk a little bit about that ability to manage our emotions in daily activities. And then having a wide variety of interests so that you're not always in one area, because that's really important, right? We have to have balance in our life. We need physical activity. We need activities that keep us mentally strong, like music, like art, like meditation, anything that's, gives us our whole life balance. Spending time with family, those are important. Spending time with people that really are important to us. So we have an ability to balance our life. So these are, again, there's many other characteristics, but I thought I'd share you with some of those. Okay, so how do we know how we're doing? We might think we're doing okay, so but still we feel stressed, or still we feel that things are difficult and challenging, and our emotions are coming up. So where do we know where we're at? Well, there's no normal and there's no perfect answer, but we can get an idea of where we are in the range. And these are, everybody can write them down if you'd like. They are some tests that you can do, little assessments. They're quite fun, and you can look at how do you gauge in the mental health perspective. So are you feeling challenged or overwhelmed, or you're not balanced? So these things look at mental health as well as a stress index, and also looking at your work-life balance. And that's really important even for the parents in the group, looking at work-life balance. And so these 3 little tests, they're quite fun to do, and they give you a little bit of insight and awareness on where are you at in the spectrum, and when is it time to get some extra help, or when is it time to pull back and say, oh, this is really starting to affect my life. So what are the things, and we're not going to go through the test itself because it requires an interaction and stuff, but these are some of the things that they're going to ask you. Do you tend to live in the moment, or are you dwelling in the past? Are you recognizing that what can you recognize, what can be changed and what can't be changed? Are you often worried about the future all the time? Is your family life safe and secure? And then resilience, that when life gets tough, I get support from my family and friends, or when things are not working well, I can't function. Where are you in that spectrum? When stress happens, does it mean that you can't get your schoolwork done, or you can't get your other work, or the parents can't go to work, or they feel that they're not working well at school, at their job or at school? So understanding where you are in the resilience, and then we can use strategies to improve that resilience. So these are the type of questions those questionnaires will ask, and you can go through them. They talk about balance, making room for hobbies, trying to practice a regular relaxation technique. But are friends or family complaining that they never see you because you never make time for them, or you don't have any time, or you've got too many things on the go? So those are the things to be aware of. Again, self-actualization. Are you feeling like you're reaching your potential? Do you have good self-esteem? When people compliment you, do you have trouble believing what they say, or can you accept a compliment? So these are things, when we start being aware, it allows us to have an internal dialogue of what's happening with us, what's happening with our body, what's happening with our brain, where are we in our life? Because otherwise we can continue to spin sometimes in the same thoughts, the same thoughts, the same thoughts. But these things allow us to say, okay, this is something I'm doing okay. But, or this is a time where, if that's showing up, I need to do something about it. So what about resilience? With resilience, resilience, as we said, is the ability to bounce, to recover quickly from difficulties. Okay, some things happened. You didn't get on the team, or you failed an exam, or you didn't do well on an exam, or you have to tell your parents about something that's happened at school, and then you're stressed, and then you come home and it consumes you for the next day, the next 2 days. You can't eat properly, you can't sleep properly. That's not as much resilience. We want to develop the resilience to be able to say, bounce back and say, okay, this has happened. Now, how am I going to deal with the situation? What am I going to do with the situation? What are the thoughts I'm having about the situation? Is there something I can brainstorm about doing it? So different people have different ways about how to bounce back. So what's really important about and Swami talks about the tests, right? When we have these tests, when we have these difficulties, we can bounce back, but it's a time of growth. When we have these difficulties and these tests, Swami talks about it, getting promotion. These are times of a lot of profound growth for a lot of people. So for example, if you're, you are on the team, you're supposed to be on a team and you didn't get picked to the team, you have to sit down and say, oh, I can feel really bad. That's not fair. I didn't get on this team. It's not fair that this happened. This person picked. But when we pick ourselves up and say, and reflect, why didn't we get on the team? Do you think it's because it's not fair? Or do you think, is there something that I can do to change my abilities? Can I work harder? Is this important to me? Is this really where I want to go? Or am I just doing it because everybody else is doing it? And when you have a dialogue and you grow from that, then you put your energies to what you really want to do and pick yourself up and say, no, I want to do that. I'm going to try really hard. I want to do really well at school. If someone says you're not good at math, well, do I want to become good at math? And if this is an opportunity for me to say, okay, I'm going to take this and maybe I need some extra help. So that's when we have good resilience, we pick ourselves up, we find solutions, and we use all these different strategies that we're going to talk about to make us go forward, and we grow. And that's the beauty, that's the important part in this stage of group 3 and group 4, your life, is the more you're able to bounce back and the more you're able to grow and change, you're preparing for your university life or life as an adult in the real world, because you're going to be hitting a lot of challenges, and we can't just hide in our room. We can't just, retreat from life, because we have to face it. And that's where the growth happens. And resilience is not a personality trait that you're born with. Everybody thinks, oh, they're so strong or they're confident. They're just born that way. That's not true. Actually, it's something that we have to build muscles for. We can learn resilience, okay? And some people there are certain factors that give some people more resilience than others. It might be their family environment. It might be their role modeling. It might be just their innate, a little bit of ability of positive thinking, but it's certainly a skill that we can learn. And we're going to talk about building the resilience muscles. So again, there's a little link there for you to sort of talk about, where is your resilience? How resilient are you? And are you really low on the resilience factor? And then you need to work hard to get that up, because we know resilience is really important for mental health. When we are resilient, our mental health is strong. So you can get a little score on that. If you're really strong with mental resilience, then you're going to be in good shape to face life challenges. Okay, so what happens when, let me just look at the time, what happens when we have these challenges? What happens, we have to get resilience for them, but what I want to share with you first is really understand what happens to our brain, what happens to our body when we have the stress response, because these challenges will come up. And when the challenges come up, we have a stress, right? The stress of school, stress of family, stress of what everybody thinks of me, all these things that come up. And Swami talks about it, right? He talks about exactly that thing. The secret of perfect health lies in keeping the mind always cheerful, never hurried, never borne by any fear or thought or anxiety. Oh, that's pretty hard, isn't it? That's pretty hard. Swami has a tall task for us. I don't know if I can say that I've never had anxiety in my life or fear in my life, or I've always been cheerful. But that's, at least Swami set us the goal post. But what Swami's really trying to tell us here, he said the secret of perfect health, because Swami's telling us he knows that when we are stressed, when we are having that stress response, that does a huge amount of damage on our physical health and our mental health. And that's why the secret of perfect health lies in this, to control the emotions and control the fears, because we don't do the damage in our body. So what happens with it when we're stressed? And I'm sure some of you, if you're doing any classes in science or biology, you've heard about the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is our automatic reaction in our body. Okay, and it controls everything from our breathing to all our bodily functions and everything else. But there are parts of the autonomic nervous system, called the sympathetic nervous system, that activates the fight and flight response. So you have a stress, this automatic response in the brain says, there's danger, there's a problem here, I've got to react to it. And you go into fight or flight. And fight means, you know, that you are going to fight the saber-toothed tiger or the animal or bear that's coming in front of you, or you have to run. And this was a protective mechanism for us when we were in caveman days, right? When we had to fight for survival, we had to be very attuned to the stress and be very attuned to the threat that was around us. We had to be able to be prepared. This autonomic nervous system kicked in. It's not going to say, well, I wonder if that bear is dangerous or not. It doesn't give us time. It's automatic. The problem is that same automatic nervous system doesn't differentiate when you've got a huge stress at school or a huge stress at home. It doesn't know, oh, that's maybe a different than the bear stress. It's already an automatic system. So if we're having that stress response, our body's ready to fight or flight. So what does that look like at home? What does that look like in school? It means if someone threatens you, someone criticizes you, and they challenge you, then your immediate response is to fight back, or your defensive mechanism, or your anger comes up because the body's trying to fight, okay? Or you want to run away. You want to get out of there. You just want to leave. You go up to your room, or you go to somewhere else. You just want to leave because you want to run away from danger. That's what happens with this fight and flight response. So the brain, if we're only activating at that sympathetic nervous system level, then it goes into automatic mode, and we have less control on the once that automatic mode is set in, we have less control on it. But we also have a parasympathetic mode, okay? So the parasympathetic is the relaxation, rest and digest, relaxation response. And when we are aware, when we have a moment in time, when a stress happens, before that automatic system kicks in, we have a moment to be aware. And when we're aware, we can activate the parasympathetic. We can take a deep breath, we can relax, and we can what does Swami say? Swami says, go take a glass of wine. You're feeling angry, when you're noticing that automatic anger is coming up, that the thing is to be aware of it, right? When you notice that you're starting to sweat, or you're starting to go step away, take a glass of water, take some deep breaths, go for a walk. That's where we're at. Then we can break the cycle of that automatic system continuing on and activating the parasympathetic, activating the relaxation response. The problem is the body can't live in the sympathetic, the activation response, and the parasympathetic, the relaxation response. We can't live in both at the same time. We are either in one or the other. And we can toggle between one and the other. But if we're too much in the activated stress response, the farther we go down that pathway, the harder it is to go into the relaxation response. So our bodies were designed to live in the parasympathetic. That's where we're supposed to live 80 to 90% of our time. And we're only supposed to live a tiny little bit in that activated response when we have to run and fight, or when we have to when we have to exercise or when we have to do something that's requiring that adrenaline piece. But the remainder of that time, we're supposed to be relaxed. And then our body can think from our executive brain. When we're not in the sympathetic overdrive, when we're in the parasympathetic, the relaxation mode, guess what happens with our brain? Our brain starts to think more clearly. It starts to work with the executive function of the brain. So it uses all the parts of the brain to think, rather than the limbic primitive brain, which is the animalistic brain, which is responding just automatically to our environment. So what happens with the relaxation response? So the relaxation response, our heart rate is down, our breathing is down, our blood pressure is down, we conserve, we get more energy, we build up energy in our body, we repair cells. We need this for long-term survival. Okay, that's what I'm saying, is we were supposed to live the majority of our life in the parasympathetic for long-term survival, so we can get, improve our brain cells, improve our body. And when we're like that in the parasympathetic, we're calm, we're focused, we have better digestion, we have more long-term memory, we have improved executive function. Okay, when we're in the fight and flight response, when we're in the stress response, what happens? We have increased heart rate, faster breathing, blood pressure, our digestion goes down. And one of the worst things that we can do is eat when we're stressed, because when we eat when we're stressed, then we don't digest that food. And even from an Ayurvedic perspective, they say it's better to eat not so good food when you're relaxed and rest than even eating the most healthiest food when you're stressed, because you turn it into something very toxic. You can't digest it. So all of this, then what happens when we're stressed? We get cramps in our belly, we don't feel good, we feel bloated, we burping, we get anxious, we don't have an appetite. So the stress response is important. It's an important piece in our body because it's needed for short-term survival. It doesn't, when you're trying to run from a stranger or some danger, you don't want to sit there and eat. So the body's adapted its mechanisms to serve the purpose of where you're supposed to be at. But when we're in that stress response, how does our emotions come up? Angry, anxious, irritable. We start sweating because all our heart rate, our whole metabolic state is aroused. We're in high overdrive. Adrenaline keeps going. Get stomach pains, weakness. We can't focus because our body wants to run. Body doesn't say, I want to focus. He says, I want to get out of here. So that's where we want to always, if we're trying to live in this, if we're living this adrenaline rush all the time, we're not optimizing our thinking brain or our digestive brain or the rest of the body. So really trying to be in that relaxation response, whether it be in our thoughts, in what we're doing with meditation, with prayer, our relaxation pieces, it's really important to be in touch. Where are you? Where's your body? What's happening with your body? Am I in the stress response or I'm in the relaxation response? And so again, this is one of those quick tests that you can do for yourself and see how high is your stress index? Where do you go? Do you blow up easily? Do you make a big deal about everything? Are you always blaming other people? Or you are having, you're pretty calm, you're relaxed, you're able to talk easily to people, you get support from your family. So where's your stress index? And so take a moment to do that stress index. It'll help you kind of understand, where am I at? Am I living in that parasympathetic or am I living in the sympathetic? So at the same time, when we're having that stress response, what's happening in our brain? This is an important piece that I want all of you to understand. What's happening in our brain when we have chronic stress and we have chronic negative thoughts? Actually, the hormones in our brain change. I'm sure you've all heard of serotonin and dopamine and all these other neurotransmitters that occur in the brain. Okay, and when we have chronic stress and chronic negative thoughts, the levels of serotonin in our brain go down, because our body's constantly overridden with these other stress, the sympathetic overdrive response, that in order to have healthy serotonins, which is the happy hormone, we have to create the happy emotions and reinforce that to create that neurotransmitter at a healthy level in our brain all the time. Okay, and so what we've seen now in medical technology is when we actually look at a brain's MRI, we can actually see structural changes that in the brain. The frontal thinking part of the brain, it changes if we've got chronic stress. So we can actually now pick out people who've had post-traumatic stress disorder or people who've had a lot of long-term depression or anxiety. You can see that the brain actually looks different, not only in the chemistry inside, but in the structure. Sometimes the brain shrinks in certain areas and that doesn't function as well. And we also know that neurons that fire together wire together. So if we're constantly thinking the same type of thoughts, let's say we are exposed, we go to a gathering with our friends and we have a negative thought that someone's judging us, and then we have that thought again and again, and every time we meet someone, that those type of thoughts come again. And then what happens is that in our brain gets wired over and over and over. So sometimes then, even when we see a different person or a different situation, our brain is still firing down the other pathway. It's an automatic response going down the negative pathway of, oh, I'm being judged, I'm being judged. Because the brain, that's what it knows. It's responding with the same pathways to various different stimuli. And so what I tell people is that, it's like if we actually have to rewire the brain. That's what neuroplasticity is. When we rewire the connections in the brain to experience thoughtful, happy thoughts, positive thoughts, different ways of thinking and not judging ourselves and not judging others. We have to rewire that brain. So we actually have to physically disconnect them in the brain and reconnect them with a different thought process. And a nice way to understand this is if you're walking in the woods, in the snow, and you see a path, there's a big forest there, and you see a path, and there's so much snow, and you see a path, and there's a path where someone has walked. Which path are you going to go down? Are you going to go into the deep snow and trudge and make a different path? Not really. You're going to go down the path that you already know, that's already made there for you. You're going to keep going down that path. But neuroplasticity is like, okay, I'm going to rewire the brain and I'm going to make a different path. I'm going to go through the other part of the snow, make a different path. And as you make a different path of a better way of thinking, or happier way of thinking, then the snow will come down and cover the old path, right? And that slowly over time, that automatic negative thinking goes away. So what can we do? How can we change that process? Well, there are things that we can do to rewire the brain. The brain changes. One is CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. And you know what? That's another fancy name for what Swami talks about, thought, word, and deed. Swami talks about mind your thoughts because it affects what your words are and affects how you act. And Swami has told us very clearly how this all works together, that our thoughts affect everything that we do. So CBT is a wonderful approach, and there's lots of resources, and we can provide those to the SSE gurus and the parents and you and all of you, is that there's wonderful resources that you can use to help train your brain to think different thoughts, to think happy thoughts, or to think confidence thoughts, to help the negative thinking turn into the positive thinking. So brain exercises, that's the CBT. Exercises for the body. So when we exercise, physically exercise, it's very good for the brain. It's very good for those dopamine and serotonin neurotransmitters. So parents, encourage your children to exercise. We don't want them studying all the time. We need them to exercise. And students, exercise. It's very good for the brain. So look at Swami's students. He didn't just put them only in studies. He put them in music and arts and sports because Swami knows that a well-rounded individual works on different parts of the body, the brain, the body, physically strong and mentally strong. So exercise for the body. The other thing is that we know now that exercise increases something called BNDF, brain neurotropic growth factor, BNTF. And it's a brain neurotropic growth factor. So we can actually increase and change our brain cells with exercise, and especially the type of exercise that increases your heart rate. So you need to get a little target. Doesn't mean you have to go running all the time, but if you can walk, run, or increase your heart rate, it increases the brain growth in your cells. So we can develop new cells in the brain. Nutrients. Good food. Body needs proper glucose, not high sugar, needs vitamin Bs, needs vitamin D. It needs a lot of good nutrients. So again, not too big of scope for this talk, but nutrition is very, very key for the good brain development. And then meditation and mindfulness. Swami talks about meditation. Swami talks about breathing. Swami talks about calming the mind. And that, I'm not going to go into great depth about that, but that is so powerful. It's one of the most powerful exercises for our brain, because guess what? It keeps us in that parasympathetic, keeps us in the relaxation response, allows us to come to the world and respond to the world in a much, not in the fight and flight, but in the part of the brain that's really able to handle executive function and good decision making. So one of the things we have to know about our brain, we have to be aware of it, is that it often goes into this default mode, right? It goes into the mind wandering mode. And this is from the work of Dr. Amit Sood, who is from Mayo Clinic. And he talks about this. And if anybody want to write his name down, he's got some TED Talks, and he's got some beautiful resource on resilience, developing resilience. But he talks about this default mode where we spend so much of our time in our brain wandering. And he likens it. There's so many. If you had on your desktop like 700 files open, it's going to be so hard to manage all these files, because one file keeps on. You got to look at the information in one file, the other file, the other file. So when we're working and at school or at home, we're thinking about school, we're thinking about our parents, we're thinking about our friends, we're thinking about what we can do or not do, or all these things we're thinking of. All these files are open. It's a higher risk for anxiety, higher risk for depression, because we can't handle all these files at once. So he talks about getting us to go into focus mode. Get the brain to focus on one thing at a time. The brain loves to be in the focused mode, but we don't give it the chance to do that. So even Swami talks about being in the moment, one thought at a time, focusing on your activity. If you're exercising, you're exercising. If you're studying, you're studying. If you're cooking, you're cooking. Focus. Don't have too many files open, because they're going to run away. And the other thing to be aware of the brain is that we have something called a negativity bias. And that is really, it's meant for us to protect ourselves. So our brain is aware of the negative stuff in the world to protect us. But that doesn't work for us in today's day and age, because what happens is the brain always focuses on the negative instead of, and with these fears and things that they think is going to happen, but it forgets to focus on the goodness. We get used to the goodness in our life, all the things that we can be grateful for and gratitude, but we get used to the goodness and the good stuff, and we focus on the imperfections. So it's important that we be aware of that and constantly, again, rewire that neuroplasticity, focus on the good stuff. What are the physical changes? So what's happening in the brain? What else is happening in adolescence? And I'm going to go through this quickly because I'm realizing the time is going. What are the other things that are happening in the brain in this stage of your life? Physical changes, hormonal changes. A really interesting thing that a lot of people don't know is at this time between the ages of 12 to 18, our brain is actually getting a little smaller. You won't believe that. It's getting a little smaller, but it's getting small, but it's getting more concentrated. So the brain is called synaptic pruning. The brain clips off the stuff that it doesn't want or doesn't need and focuses on getting the stuff that's really important better. Okay. And this is the brain maturation. So you make more connections in the stuff that you're doing all the time, and the stuff that you're not using very much, it goes away. So this is that use it or lose it. So this is really important for teenagers, because if you spend all your time on video games, or if you spend all your time on Google or the internet, that's what your brain is focusing on all the time. You need to make sure you balance it, that your whatever you want for your brain, focus on that now. So if you want it to be, if you're academics, you can focus on problem solving. If you want to be with your physical health, with sports. And the thing is, you don't want it to be all one-sided. You want a balanced brain. So to really make sure we use our time effectively to get the best brain that we can at this. This is a very crucial part of a person's life, is in actually adolescence. We used to think it was only in childhood from ages 0 to 5, but we now know there's such an important time in adolescence. So use the activities that you want to develop in your brain. Play music, do your problem solving, do your sports, do meditation, use the meditation, spiritual exercises to improve that part of your brain, because that's called the frontal lobe, and the executive brain is very powerful in making very complex decisions and brain function later on in life. Cognitive development. So remember that you're going from a stage in your life where thinking of absolutes, black and white, to a gray area, to understanding things are not black and white. Things are not always right or wrong. There's somewhere in between. How do I gauge what's right and how do I gauge what's wrong? It depends on the circumstance, depends on the person. So these are changes that are happening in your brain, and they're hard to deal with sometimes, because all that you knew was true is not necessarily true anymore. And so be understanding of that. Emotional regulation. There's a lot of heightened arousal that's happening in your brain right now. So again, we're responding to threats, someone judging you, someone criticizing, you're responding to that a lot faster and harder, because your brain is going through all these changes. So you may not have done that so much when you were younger. You might not do it so much when you're older, but at this time you have to be aware that the brain is heightened and ready to respond, because it's changing with all these hormonal changes. And you want to make sure you're in control and bring it down. Delayed gratification, not always looking for that dopamine hit, because that's what the brain is sort of wanting. That's why there's risky behaviors and things like that. So we want to tone down that tone out that gratification, so we don't get into trouble. And then another process that's happening in your brain right now and in your mind is trying to figure out who you are. There's you're different. Maybe you're not exactly as your family. Maybe you have your own identity. What do you want to do? Peers are telling you what you should look like or be like. Family's telling you what you should be like, or Swami's telling you what you should. And all these different things are coming in at you. Social media is telling you something different. It's really hard to make sense of all that. But spend some time with yourself and spend some time figuring out who you are. Who do you really want to be? And it's going to change. It's never going to be static. But that going through that process helps you deal with, my friends might say this, or someone might say this, but this is what's important to me, and figure it out and understand what the consequences of that are. And then social. You all know that you're getting social influence. I'm going to move forward here. So let's go through some strategies. What are we going to do? We've got all this information. We've got these stressors. We realize what mental health is about. We realize we need to have resilience. What are we going to do to get there? And I think, first of all, for both the audiences in the group, is that, we have parents and students. And I think what I'd love to do is in a later stage is do a different session just for parents and one just for students, but just to really start the conversation. And it's really important. Sometimes they're hard conversations. We as parents have to know, really at the end of the day, what do we want for our child? What do we want for our teen? We want them to be happy. And we have a conceived notion of what that should look like, what type of education they should have, what type of partner they should have, what type of activities they have. But ultimately, we want them to be happy. And for those who you've gone through the dynamic value parenting, we know that happiness doesn't necessarily always come in all the external world. We want actually our teens to be happy from the inside, not depending on what's happening with their friends, not depending on how it's happening at school, and not depending on everything else, but really how do they be happy inside, and getting that self-confidence. And the self-confidence comes, they need you as parents. They need you to be good listeners and not judge them. They're trying to figure things out. So not to judge them at this time. Be a good listener. Let them open their world to you. Because if they feel judged, they're not going to talk. Empower your teenager. Ask open-ended questions. What do you think you can do? Ask them for advice. Ask them for suggestions. Hey, you're having this struggle. So what do you, rather than just giving our advice, let them figure it out. Part of that confidence building is getting them to figure it out. What do you think you should do? What are the options? What would this option look like? What would that option look like? Get them to take the proactive steps. And then if they're really struggling, listen, we're going to talk a little bit about that, but listen to what they're saying, because if they're struggling, we don't want to say that they shouldn't be feeling something, because they're actually feeling it. It's not a right or wrong, it's they're feeling it. But how do they deal with those feelings is what's more important. And so reduce the stigma of they shouldn't be feeling that, or shouldn't be feeling this, or it's just, you'll be okay. You have to get them to talk and let them explore their emotions and their struggles with you. And for students, it's really important for you to talk when you go to your parents when you're a little bit more calm, if you can, or if you're really emotional, just tell them that you just want to talk to them. Let them hear you. Reflect and understand your emotions. Try to make sense of your own emotions first, because the parents don't necessarily understand where you're coming from all the time. So try to get some clarity with your own thoughts as well first. And dialogue. Understand your fears of your parents. They want you to succeed. They have a different background, a different upbringing. Sometimes they want you to succeed. They want you to be happy, and their paradigm is a certain paradigm. It may be the same as yours. It might be different than yours. But when you start with understanding, Swami talks about understanding first and then adjust. And both parents and students, if we understand first where each other's coming from, we can start to adjust with each other and dialogue with them. Okay, so Swami talks, this is the crux of it, and I'm going to go a little bit over, but Swami talks about thought, word, and deed. And remember, we talked about the cognitive behavioral therapy. Thought, word, and deed. All action results from our thoughts. So it's the thoughts that matter. What matters is to live in the present, live now, for every moment is now. It is the thought and action that, I can't see that, sorry. It is the thought and acts of the moment that create your future. The outline of your future path is already created for you. The outline of your future path already exists, for you created its pattern by your past. So whatever we're doing today is going to have the consequences of tomorrow. Whatever we think today is going to affect how we're feeling, what we say, and what we do. So if we are thinking that we're not good enough to participate in that, and I'm not good enough singer, I'm not good enough student, I'm not good. If we're thinking that, then we're going to say those words to ourselves and others. We're going to act that out in our life. We're going to not take opportunities. We're not going to be bold enough and have confidence to persist, to pursue. And if we don't do that, then the opportunities and what we go down the future will be affected. So Swami's talking about that. Whatever we're doing, we're thinking, we're behaving, our actions are going to affect tomorrow and the day after and our future life. So let's talk about breaking that vicious cycle of the negative thoughts, feelings, physical symptoms. And this is, again, a much deeper discussion, but I want you to just take away this picture that these are all connected. When we have a certain thought, we start to develop certain feelings. We think a negative thought, I'm not good enough, or no one loves me, or my parents are so upset with me, or I'm not good enough at school. Any of these thoughts, they start converting into feelings. We get anxious, I get guilty, we feel awful about ourselves. Things that are negative thoughts start to our feelings come. We get, maybe low mood, depressed. And then we also get physical symptoms. We don't feel like eating, or sometimes we feel like eating more. Sometimes we get sweaty, we get butterflies in our stomach, we feel nervous and jittery. So all these physical feelings start to happen, and then that starts to affect our behavior. Who's going to go out and challenge a new challenge, or go to study for a test, or go to try practicing some sports, or doing what we need to do, or doing community seva, or coming and cooking in the kitchen when we're feeling awful? But it started with one thought, right? Nothing changed in your environment. It's the thoughts that started, and then there's a vicious cycle of going to the feelings, the symptoms, and the behaviors. So our goal is to break the vicious cycle. It's to break the thoughts. And the key is, in any of these, with cognitive behavioral therapy, and even what Swami tells us in all of his teachings, is if we can start to do this in one way or the other, we can either stop the thoughts or break the thoughts, or we can change the behavior. And if we change the behavior, the thoughts will change. So if we start doing something positive for ourselves, we start having better thoughts. So anywhere in this cycle, we can enter this cycle and change one of the things, which will take us into a better cycle. Okay. So what are some of the techniques that we can use to break the thoughts? You've heard maybe in one of the previous talks, if any of you were there, is soda. Stop. Just try to stop. You're thinking all these things. Take a big break. Stop. Observe. Be the observer. Swami says we are not our thoughts, right? We are the consciousness behind our thoughts. Observe our thoughts. When you become the observer and the witness to your thoughts, you give them less power. Okay? Because then you realize, okay, these are my thoughts. They're not me. Stop, observe, detach from them. These are not my thoughts. These are thoughts that are there. They're my brain's thoughts, but I can be in control of them. And then reaffirm or affirm a different thought. So what do I want to replace this type of thought with? And sometimes you don't have to believe it. Sometimes that positive thought, you don't have to believe it. It's like fake it till you make it. You have to just think a positive thought. Think of someone who loves you. Think of gratitude, just to stop the negative cycle. And when we do that, we can slow that sympathetic nervous system down. We can get into the parasympathetic, because love and gratitude and positive thoughts hit this parasympathetic and keep us in a different place. What are some other things? Label it. One of the things is, are we mind readers? We always think, I know what that person's thinking. I know what they're saying about me. I know what they're thinking about me. Are we mind readers? Can we really be truly sure that we know what they're thinking? So label it. When you have these thoughts, say, oh, there I go. I'm mind reading again. And when you tell yourself you're mind reading, you can console it. Hey, I don't believe that. Are you catastrophizing? Have you ever had a thought where you think of one thing and you think, and it's just a small thought, but then, oh, what if I get sick? And what if I get sick, then what about my parents will get sick? And if my parents get sick, what will happen with my parents? What will happen with them? What if someone loses their job? It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the whole spiraling downwards. We're catastrophizing. So if we catch ourselves, if we stop and observe, here we go, I'm doing that again. I'm catastrophizing. I'm mind reading. Then we take the power away from the thoughts. Another way, challenge your thoughts. Stand up to them. You're more powerful than your thoughts. I don't need you. I don't need those thoughts. You don't need to control my life. Get control. Be aware of your thoughts and be in control. Challenge them to not take control of your life the way they do. That's one of my favorite. Time out. I don't know if I'm dating myself with a parent, but we used to have time out, put children in a corner. Well, now you can put your thoughts in the corner, right? Give your thoughts a time out. Say, I don't want to think about you right now. I know I have to deal with that situation, but right now I'm focusing on my music. I'm focusing on my studies. I'm focusing on helping my sister. I'm going to just put you in the corner for a while. You're going to have a timeout. Then it loses its power. And then when you come to revisit that problem or the thought about that problem, you're coming at it from a different perspective and a calmer place. Replace the thoughts. Replace them with positive thoughts. I've done this before. I can do this. Swami will help me. If I have support, I can get help. I know that I'm not that good at this, but I can try harder, and my best is my best. That's good enough. I am good enough. All these positive statements, even if sometimes we don't believe them, change how we're feeling and changing that whole cycle of the negative spiral. The key is to get the thoughts from stopping the negative cycle. So then we talk about changing behavior. So we can change our thoughts, but we can also change our behavior. Do something different, right? Just do something different. You're feeling anxious, feeling upset, you're worried about this. Go and do something. Go for a walk. Go do some exercise. Get a friend or a family member to help you. Play some music. Go for a walk in the forest. Do something different. Listen to Swami's discourse. Do some meditation. Go do some cooking. Do something different. There's a lot of things that you can do. Just change the behavior so that you don't get into that negative cycle again. And it'll change the thoughts, right? There's a whole course in that. Okay, a couple of little other exercises, and then and I know it's, I want to leave time for question and answers, but a couple of different exercises, again, from Dr. Amit Sood. He says, start your day. Some people talk about starting our day with meditation, but even if we don't have time to do that, or we can't always do that, if we can, that's the best. And even in that meditation, we can do this. When you wake up, think about 5 people that you are grateful for. Look into the eyes of the first person and send them a lot of love. Go back to the first memory of that person. See the person happy. See that person, see yourself when you were 8 years old. That can be one of these people. Choose different people. And then do a different exercise with each person. So with yourself, go back to when you're 8 years old and love yourself. Remember that beautiful self of you, happy person. Look in your eyes and say how much you love them and you're grateful for that person when they were yourself when you were 8. Look at someone, remember someone who's passed away that you love, and silently send each of these people gratitude and love. When we do that, we start the neurochemistry, that whole pharmacy in our brain starts our day in a different way, activating all the positive hormones in our brain. When you feel judged, think about 3 people who care about you. Think about these people who love you, who you're grateful for. And the goal is not necessarily to avoid discomfort. Like, we can't avoid discomfort. Someone judges us, someone criticizes us, we're going to feel bad. But it's about sometimes how quickly we can shift and recover. Well, that person doesn't love me, but I have 5 other friends who just think the world of me. Or, my family loves me, or Swami loves me, or I feel good because I'm part of this group. We change the dialogue in our brain. Another exercise, 3 minutes. I thought this was really nice, and I think this is great for both parents and students today. Dr. Sood talks about novelty, finding novelty where love is. So we love our family, right? But guess what? When we go to see someone new, when we're meeting someone new, it's novel, we engage with them. We pay attention to what they're saying. We interact with them. We're very interested in them. But we don't do the same necessarily with our family, who we love so much. So he talks about find novelty where love is. Try to find something new or something interesting to talk to about your family, with your family, when you meet them each day. Be intentional. So when you come home from school, or when the parents come home from work, don't just go up to your room with the students, or go to the kitchen. Greet your family member. Look them in the eye. Hello, how are you? So this is what I did today, or what did you do today, or what happened at this place, or I discovered a new book, or something should bring up novelty. Be intentional, be interested in the other person, and be willing to share something about you. And it's really hard if one person is not engaged versus the other. So that's what I'm talking about, parents and students, is if we intentionally just take that 3 minutes to be present with your child, with your parent, love them, look them in the eye, give them love and gratitude, and then go about your whatever tasks you are. It just shifts the dynamic. It brings us resilience, because we know we're connecting and bonding to that person, and lifts our serotonins, lifts our dopamines, and also we feel supported. Okay. Then the other one is the first 3 minutes when you're engaging with this person, don't find faults. Don't criticize. Praise them. Give them if you praise them, you'll give them undivided attention. And praise doesn't mean necessarily false praise. Praise can just be giving love, can just be sharing some wonderful, tender moments, can be thanking them for something they did, but don't criticize. How often do we sometimes say, oh, I came home, did you get your work done? Did you do this? Did you do that? Starts with the lists, right? And so then right away, that fight and flight on the team comes up, or that defensive mechanisms, because they feel judged. So just be present, get that loving dialogue and loving situation happening. Okay, so steps towards creating and sustaining mental health. We've talked a lot about them, and we're just going to sort of go through a few very quickly. But first, being very aware. Being aware of your mental health. Where are you at? Do some of those exercises. And be aware of your dialogue. what is the conversation that's happening in your brain on a daily basis? We are very aware of sometimes the conversations that are happening in our family or our friends or everything. But are we ever aware? Are we ever take the time to listen to what we say to ourselves in our dialogue all the time? What are we saying? What do we do? How do we want to change it or do we don't? Are we feeling good about ourselves or we're not? Exercise. We've talked a lot about exercise. Diet is very important. And again, don't have too much time to go into diet, but eating a very healthy, get the sugar out of the diet. That's really difficult on the brain. It creates these highs and lows and highs and lows, the simple sugars. Eat healthy, vegetarian, whole foods, lots of fruits and vegetables. Your plate should be half fruits and vegetables. Okay. Stress management. We talked a lot about stress management, balancing your life, social connections. We need that social connection, and it's really hard in the pandemic. It's really, really hard, but we still can do things possible. We can go out for a walk in the outdoors. We can connect with our family and friends. We can connect on Zoom. We can reach out to someone who's not doing well. Just finding creative ways to have our support systems. And again, our spirituality. Sometimes our spirituality might look different. It's not at the Sai Center now. It's a little different, but maybe do some reading. Do some, connect with your study circle, with the virtual stuff. Whatever you can, don't lose that connection. It's so easy not to be on it, right? But don't forget that that's a connection that sustains your mental health. Connecting with nature wherever we can, that's a very, very powerful thing. Swami talks about nature. He says you will find God in nature, right? So that'll help your spiritual soul. Helping others. Whenever we help others, guess what happens? Our own serotonins go up, and the serotonins in the person that we're helping goes up. And it could be helping your mom, it could be helping family, it could be helping your child, it can be helping a neighbor, it can be helping in many different ways, right? But whenever we help each other, we feel good about ourselves, we feel relevant, we feel, and we also, the other person receives love and care. So both people's serotonin, we've actually measured this, serotonin level goes up, and actually goes up higher in the person who's doing the giving or the helping. Expressing and receiving love, we talked about that. And then the last one there is having a sense of purpose in life. That's what's missing for a lot of young people today is what's their purpose? Where do they fit in the whole world? Where are they going to do when they grow up? Where are they going to be at? A sense of purpose. So trying to engage in that sense of purpose. And Swami's given us a lot of direction of what our sense of purpose can be. And then the other thing is getting help when needed. And that's really very, very important because sometimes even if you're doing all of this, and we'll talk a little bit about that, is you need some extra help. Again, I'm not going to go through this in great detail. These are the resilience muscles, okay? We've talked a lot about this. Composure, recognizing a stressful situation, and choosing how do you want to respond. The more you do this, the more you don't react, the more you hold back, choose how you want to respond. It's that muscle. You're building muscles. It has to train, right? Resilience muscles have to be built. You have to keep training. You're not going to get it right every time. You're not going to get it right the first time. You have to keep practicing and practicing and practicing. Practice not responding from an automatic nervous system response. Okay. Practice being observing of your thoughts. Patience. You have to be. The more we get patience, the more we build the muscle of resilience and patience. So we've talked a lot about a lot of these, but if you can go through these, optimism, gratitude, kindness really builds resilience muscles. We get all of these feedback to our system that helps us to become more resilient. So what happens when, we're doing all of this, but life just deals us a tough one and we can't cope? That's when we go from being mentally well to having some mental illness. And there's a lot of stigma around mental illness in the South Asian community. But I think with the interest of time, there's not a lot of time. I'm going to flip through these a little quickly, but I think we would probably do another seminar at one point. But it's really, really important because this is where we really have to recognize that sometimes life gets a little bit too hard, or for whatever reason, there's many reasons that can happen, that we shift into a place where we're not doing very well. And that is where mental illness can affect your mood, your thinking, your behavior. Despite how much you try, you can't be happy. You're not having happy thoughts. You're feeling anxious all the time, and you can't deal with it. So some people have mental health concerns from time to time. Might be anxious for a week or two, and then I'm okay. But when it becomes pervasive all the time, and it starts to affect, what's happening in your life, okay, that's when it becomes an illness. So when do difficulties become a mental illness? When people have, they can't work at school, they can't work at their job, it's affecting their relationships, they're going further and further down, the behaviors change, not dropping out of school, not doing your homework, crying all the time, not being able to function in the family. And, unfortunately, with the South Asian population, there's a lot of stigma around that because we think we're supposed to be always mentally strong, and it's really hard. So it's important to recognize when this does happen. We can reach for help, and reach for help doesn't necessarily always mean medication. It means getting somebody to help you with all of these things that we've talked about, but there's also some more deeper things of training and counselors or other resources that we can use to help get you out of that vicious cycle. Okay. What are the risk factors for mental illness? So there's lots. There's genetic, if you have a strong family history. There's biological ones, people who've had trauma at birth or head injuries or infections in their brain or other medical issues. There's those ones that can happen. They make them higher risk for having a mental illness. Concussions, hormonal changes. Women are more susceptible to depression around postpartum, after childbirth, around puberty, around menopause. So there's different hormonal changes that make us higher risk for mental illness. Alcohol and drugs for sure, and that's something that the young people really need to know about, especially high rates of schizophrenia with cannabis use. And I mention it there just because I want to put it out there. Domestic stress and domestic violence really is a high risk factor for mental illness in parents and in students. Very high risk factor. And unfortunately, we've seen it just escalate in the pandemic. So just watch what's happening in the family. If you don't like, there's a lot of fighting or there's a lot of negativity, step back and say, how am I going to take care of this? It's important because this is a negative risk factor. Poor role models. If we don't have good role models of people who cope, parents or grandparents who deal with stress, how do they deal with it? If we don't have good role models, that's another, we don't learn good role modeling. Bullying in our community, in our schools, immigration, isolation, those are all risk factors. And then another big thing is the stigma. When we're stigma, because we have a window of opportunity. When we go from mentally healthy to just having some decline, but it's not affecting our life so much, to where it goes in mental illness. And if we recognize it beforehand, and we're able to reverse it and go back the other way. But even when we do recognize it, then it's really important to be able to get the help that we need. And this is just a big slide on telling you the same thing about the risk factors. So what are the symptoms? Symptoms of mental illness: feeling sad, feeling worries, lots of mood changes, withdrawal from friends, tired, fatigue, sleep problems, inability to cope, trouble understanding people and relating to people, feeling angry, having thoughts of suicide or not wanting to live, just wanting to hide in your room, can't control the thoughts. And interestingly, a lot of increased physical symptoms, aches and pains, headaches, stomach ache, bowel issues. And then, in pre-adolescent, older children, sometimes it's defiance, sometimes it's sleeping habits. They just sleep all day long, or they don't go to sleep at all. They stay up till late at night, way late. Negative moods, frequent outbursts of anger and crying, changing in their sleeping habits, not being able to cope with school. So parents are important for you to recognize if someone's not coping at school, if they're not, like my kid, we used to do really well. What's happened to him? then it's not that he's just lazy. It's not that he's just, or she's just doesn't want to do anything or trying to be um, defiant. Something's going on in their brain. There's a lot of challenges that are going. They're trying to work through things. They don't know what to do. They're having negative self-talk. So we have to be aware. This is happening. Ask them what's going on. Let them open the door, rather than criticizing and saying, you know, you're lazy. You're not. Why didn't you get your schoolwork done? Why aren't you getting up? Why aren't you helping in the house? Dialogue with them. Help them to come to the table. In younger children, nightmares, change in school performance, sleeping habits, a lot of worrying, or a lot of separation anxiety, disobedience. And then just again, I'm a couple of slides. I just wanted you to be aware that we do have mental illness out there, and we need to not put it under the blanket. We need to know that it's 10 to 20% of Canadian youth, and South Asians are not exempt from that. Right? In 12 to 19-year-olds, 3 million of them are at risk of developing depression. And it's really a tragedy, because if we don't get help for our young students, it affects a lifelong effect. Their careers, their ability to have relationships, how they parent, how they're able to cope in the world. And one thing is that it's really important. You know, if we recognize anxiety disorders or depression, when you get the right help, it can make a huge difference for 80% of the people, allowing to go back into mentally healthy people. They don't stay there, and they're not just medications. It's about getting the support systems, getting them to understand what's going on, and getting them to help and cross that bridge. And we can give them help, and we can all, and parents have mental illness as well. So being aware of that and getting the help when it's right. 1 in 5 children don't get the mental health services that they need, partly because of stigma, partly because of not recognizing it. And lastly, just, things around South Asians. Again, I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but recognize that we present differently. A lot of physical complaints, a lot of avoidance behavior, but we are at higher risk. South Asian, especially immigrants, are at higher risk of not having mental health issues addressed or treated. And we do know that with some of the ethnic groups, we can use more of a support and situational based therapy and support systems, rather than just only biological or individual. So we treat the family and we treat the whole person, which is often very much more effective. But just recognize that it's there. Don't put it under the rug if it's happening. So again, what causes it? We've talked a little bit about the risk factors, and it's a big bag. There's genetic, biological, family situations that are happening, but we know that it can be treated. Okay. And we've talked about what we can do, working on keeping mentally healthy, reducing the stigma, starting some of the treatments that we know that work, cognitive behavioral therapy, spirituality, mindfulness, exercise, dealing with the stress response, breaking the cycle, medication if we need it. But that's where we need to do it. If it's needed, it's needed, right? But we have a lot of things that we can do before that. And getting the help from, our family doctor, the community, and reducing the stigma, which is the big thing. So one of the things that I do teach, that I'm teaching right now, but it doesn't have to be me, there is this resource in the community, which is based on cognitive behavioral therapy. It's called Living Life to the Fullest. There's programs in Ontario and in BC right now. I don't know about the rest of the provinces. You can go to the Canadian Mental Health Association, and it really, all they're talking about is giving you strategies, some of which I've presented today, on how to change the thoughts and change that vicious cycle. So Swami says, life is a song, sing it. Life is a game, play it. Life is a challenge, meet it. Life is a dream, realize it. Life is a sacrifice, offer it. And life is love, enjoy it. We are all here in this life, and we just need to meet the challenge, but that challenge comes in different ways. And let's use Swami's strength, and let's use his teachings, and all the things that we have, the resources we have to meet life where we need to meet it. Jai Sai Ram. And I think now we have, I know we've gone over time, but I will have some time for questions. If whoever wants to stay, I will be happy to wait and answer some questions. So Brother Avi, I'll head it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Sister Nishi. That was a wonderful presentation, very detailed, and I love the way that you incorporated Swami's teachings. In terms of questions, we do have quite a few questions, so I will prioritize some that are a bit more common, keeping an eye on the time. So one of those questions is, so there were a few questions about posting up the slides. So we will be sharing the slides, I believe, right?
Sure, yes.
Yeah, we will share the slides probably through an email to the education wing and then to the gurus to distribute to the youth.
And Abby, maybe I don't know, we can talk about, maybe we will be able to post the talk on the website.
Yeah, we certainly can do that. So we did record today's talk and we will post it on our website, which is scimedical.ca. In terms of questions from the attendees, does being a Sci student mean that we can't make mistakes / deal with stress or real world problems? My parents use this against me often to downplay my problems.
So, Swami tells us that, we are all embodiments of love. We are Swami, right? We are divine. But he tells us we don't realize it. So we are in the process of making these mistakes. We have to grow. And Swami says that these are tests, right? We are there to grow. We're not going to be perfect all the time. Absolutely not. But it is our challenge to see if we make mistakes, are we better for it? Are we learning from it? Are we growing from it or not? And I think Sister Kanchana once told me when I was wanting to teach the parenting workshop, I told her, I said, dear Sister Kanchana, I don't think I can, I'm not a perfect parent. I can't teach that course. I don't feel good. She asked me, she said, are you a better parent after trying to learn the course? Have you made any improvement? And I said, yes. She said, well, if you've learned and you're learning and you're changing from whatever your mistakes are, then you can teach the course as long as you constantly are improving. And, so that tells me that, yes, we are going to have problems, and parents have to recognize children are going to make mistakes. Use it as a teaching moment, help them to overcome and learn from it rather than being critical about it. What did they say? There's no mistakes, only opportunities.
Yes. There were a few questions about synaptic pruning and whether it continues on into adulthood.
So synaptic pruning is mostly in the adolescence. It does continue on into adulthood, but not as much. When in adulthood, what happens is we form deeper and more connections, continuing to, and that's where we talk about wisdom and experience with the book knowledge. It comes together, but that we have deeper connections and more connections. But the pruning happens in this teenage years, where we start cutting away the stuff that we don't need, that we're not using very much. So again, it does happen lifelong, but there's a huge activity in the adolescent, and we didn't know this 20 years ago.
Yeah. There was a question about Dr. Amit's full name and any TED Talks that you would recommend.
Dr. Amit Sood, S-O-O-D. And I think, I didn't have time to get his website, but to put it on the slides. But Amit Sood, he's from, he used to work with Mayo Clinic, and he has an institute for global resilience. I don't know the exact name, but you could Google him and find him. And he's done some TED Talks. He has a website, and it's all about resilience training.
Yeah, thank you. And then there was a comment about sleep and the importance of sleep on your mental health.
Yes.
Comment,
well, yes, and I didn't really get into sleep, but sleep is so important, especially my dear young students there. For teenagers, it's so important. Your brain is so active and needs so much rest. So, parents, sometimes they do need to sleep a little bit longer at this stage in their life. But for students, it's important not to change your circadian rhythm. Don't stay up so late, because what happens is when we stay up late, our cortisols, which are normally supposed to go down, they stay up, and then our melatonin doesn't get released, and melatonin is so important for deep quality sleep. But the other part is that when melatonin doesn't get released, our growth hormone doesn't get released as well. So there's a whole series of events that happens when we sleep, and it's all rest and repair, and our liver works and our repair mechanisms work. So if we don't go to sleep on time and have those reactions happen, we don't heal our body as well. And if we shorten our sleep to 6 hours, we're not doing that rest and repair.
Thank you. And there were several questions, and I'm going to group them into one kind of, but they're mostly focused in general on strategies on dealing with anxiety, workplace stress, panic attacks. And you did go into it with your slides, but perhaps, as you mentioned, we may be doing further webinars, which may go into more about dealing with the management and how to deal with the challenges.
Yes, certainly, Avi. And again, that's where I was struggling with this presentation, is there's so much to be able to do. But I think definitely one of those courses, Living Life to the Fullest, is a good one. I do teach that. I had taught that course at the Science Center before the pandemic, incorporating Swami's teachings, and may consider offering that. The problem is you're only allowed to offer it to 20 people at a time, because it's an interactive course. But there's lots of resources. Look up cognitive behavioral therapy. Many studies done on that showing that they help anxiety and depression, and it's very much in line with Swami's teachings. And we can certainly put another workshop on looking at some strategies on a deeper level. I needed to just sort of set the tone and create the platform for the next workshop.
Okay, and we did receive a few more questions, and all the questions have value, but keeping an eye on time, I think maybe we should leave it at that. What do you think, Nishi? Do you want to take a few more questions, or should
maybe we'll go for 5 more minutes until 11:45? What do you think, Sister Usha? Does that work?
that sounds good to me.
Yeah, sure.
She may be muted right now. Yeah. So let me load up. So one of the questions, I guess, it's hard to sometimes understand or appreciate our own mental state. How then can we truly understand another person's mental state?
Very good question. Very good question. That is very difficult, right? If we're not able to understand our own, how can we understand someone else's? I think that requires us to sort of do some reflection and on ourselves. But sometimes, many people, they can be very empathetic towards others. They can be understanding about someone else's situation. But if you say, well, why do you feel that about yourself? Can you not? They say, well, no, I know other people I can say this and be complimentary and stuff, but they can't do it for themselves. So sometimes it's not black and white, that if we don't have our own mental health, that we can't understand other people's, because it uses a different part of our brain, right? When we're using executive functioning, when we use a frontal lobe thinking, we're able to look at the world and understand others. But sometimes with our own, it's that limbic brain firing, it's that survival mode firing, and we just come up with thoughts and feelings that are on our own, but we don't necessarily always think that there's someone else's. But if we're really struggling, yes, that's part of mental illness, that if we're not even able to see another person's perspective, other than if we're not even healthy on our own. So it depends on where the spectrum is, I think, where we are ourselves.
Yeah. We also have a question about who can we talk to when there isn't somebody to talk to. Maybe it's someone that doesn't feel comfortable speaking to their family or their friends about their mental health.
Yeah. First of all, I'm going to say, I remember my childhood growing up, and sometimes I felt I just didn't have anybody to talk to. Grew up in Canada and went through struggles around bullying in school and this and that. Didn't have anybody, and I talked to Swami. I talked to Swami every day. He was my best friend. I didn't think of Swami as God. I thought of him as when I was young, I thought of him as my best friend. And I'd pour my heart out to Swami. And I said, Swami, you have to help me. And part of that, yes, it's different than talking to a parent. It's different than talking to a school counselor. It's talking, but it allows a moment for you to connect with your higher self and with Swami, and bring that connection. And at least sometimes there's a very big therapeutic value in just expressing yourself. So keep your connection with Swami. That's helped me a lot when I was young. And then, there are other people. When you don't have anybody to talk to a school guidance counselor. There's helplines out there. There are other resources out there. There's community resources. There's nurses, mental health, counselors. So it depends again on how severe your symptoms are or where you are. But there is often people, and that's one of the initiatives that hopefully we will try to do as the PSI organization, is come up with a bit of lists of resources that people can go to. It's difficult. They were asked that, can we create a helpline? And that's a huge undertaking, but maybe that's something, if Swami wants for the future, that we have PSI people who can talk to the youth and talk to the young people as mentors, because sometimes you just need an outside non-judgmental ear.
Yeah. There's another question. If you think you have a mental illness, what is the best way to tell your parents or get help?
Well, the first is you have to go speak to a health professional. I think that's the most important, because you don't want to self-diagnose yourself. And sometimes we are thinking so dark and negative when we think the worst. But if you think you have problems, and don't second guess, the worst, if you get extra help, if you go to see a health professional and get some help, they will be able to help you and guide you. Say, this is a normal response to what you're happening. This is an exaggerated response and you need these type of intervention or help, or this is really concerning. We're worried about you, right? So it helps if you have another person who's trained in this, who can help you. They'll be able to first put things into perspective for you. Once they're into perspective for you, the health professionals out there have very are skilled in bringing the family on board, and skilled in bringing and having a dialogue which sometimes parents can understand. And, again, it depends on your relationship with your parents. Sometimes you can talk to yourself, you can talk to your parents. And I encourage that. It's always good to do that. And I encourage parents to be open. Don't be afraid, because the worst thing can happen is that if your children are not talking to you and they don't get help, things will escalate. But if you are open, if you allow them to come and not judge and be open, maybe their fears are way too high, maybe they're not high enough. But we have to know where they're at and get help so that you can actually take them back to a path where they're healthy and strong and they don't go to the place where it's really bad. But the worst thing you can do is if we shut the door and say they're not supposed to have these feelings, or sometimes they can't help them. This is coming up. They've done all these exercises and it's still happening. So we don't want them to be in danger. We don't want them to get to drugs or alcohol or suicidal thoughts, and it happens. And I'm saying it because it happens, and it's a door we don't want to open. And I thought maybe we'd open it in the next seminar, but it's a door that we don't often want to talk about, but it's there. So please open the door. And as much as you're afraid of opening the door, know that, it's actually better on the other side, because you'll have your child back to work with you.
Okay. So maybe what I'll ask now is, if anyone wants to unmute themselves, you're now able to unmute yourself. You can, and if you want to direct a question directly to Sister Nishi, you can go ahead and do that. Do we have anyone? Okay.
Sairam, Sister Nishi, it's not a question, it's a comment. Thank you so much for a wonderful session you have created for all of our children and the parents. As a parent for an older kid, I really enjoyed. Thank you so much. You have given lots of practical tips, how the parents also should be behaved, with the children, and I really, really loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jay Saram. I hope we can expand this, and again, depending on what the students and the parents want, I really would think, I think it's really wonderful if we can have a parent session, because there's a lot of challenges, and knowing as a parent myself, there's a lot of challenges and fears with raising our children in today's world.
Is there anyone else? Okay, in that case, I will hand it over to Auntie Usha then.
On behalf of everyone here, and Sister Nishi, Sister Patricia, and Brother Avi, thank you so much for a wonderful session. I actually thought soda is bad for health, but today you said soda is good for health. But this is, as you said, this is just first one of many presentations which we might come back to you from the education wing and request you. And I think it is eye-opening and everyone thoroughly enjoyed it. I thank you so much on behalf of the whole NVC team. If there are no questions, we can just finish with Samastalok.
Mr. Usha,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just had one request, and Sister Nishi, Sister Pamela, and Brother Avi, awesome. Thank you for giving us this time for all of us. I just wanted to make a request that would it be beneficial to have questions solicited from before, if parents are open to that, Sister Usha? Maybe I'm not sure how feasible it would be. That will give you, because today there was this thirst, like I gained so much. I'm a grandparent, but I know, like, you know, so I'm just sharing a thought. That's it. But
that's an excellent,
very, very good. Yeah.
That's an excellent suggestion.
Yeah, I think what we can do, Sister Usha, is that, you know, when we're setting up the next seminar, we can send out, you know, anything that anybody would like to be addressed, and we can incorporate it.
Yeah.
I did have a few questions from before, so I tried to incorporate that. I am actually looking at, for next time, we have Brother Badri from Vancouver. He's a pediatrician who works in the emergency department, and he sees a lot of mental health in the South Asian population as well. And he will join us. We're looking at possibly, just for everybody out there, we're looking at possibly at the third week in June. So you will hear, I'll just get the date here. You'll see that June 20th most likely, but I will confirm that. But that would be something, again, you know, with how to, like, and that would be probably more with parents, is really understanding from what are the ones that we see that are difficult or not difficult, and how, from a parent's perspective, how do we handle things?
Oh, thank you so much. So as Sister Preeti suggested, it's an excellent suggestion. So we will, you know, elicit questions from the parent community also. Okay. Thank you. Looking forward to it. So we will just close with Om Samastaloka Sukhino Bhavantu. Samastaloka Sukhino Bhavantu. Samastaloka Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May all the beings in all the worlds be happy. Om Sai. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Good. Sai Ram.
Sai Ram.